Welcome to another Peaks Challenge Falls Creek training video. We've just made it through the Christmas New Year period, and hopefully a lot of people have had a bit of extra time off work and they've been able to really dial in that training program and get out on some big long rides. The weather's been a little bit hit and miss, so hopefully you've been smart enough to adapt the program a little bit to be able to accommodate those wet days and those nice sunny days. Now the main thing we've been doing for this training block now has been some focused long climbing efforts. So we started off with about 40 minutes total of climbing within a ride, which might be two 20-minute repeats, and we're building up to about 80 minutes. And look, 80 minutes is a lot of climbing within one main set of a session. Even an experienced rider doing four 20-minute repeats, it makes for a pretty big and hard training session. So hopefully what you're starting to see as the weeks go on is that you can get through 2 reps, you can get through 3, and you can get through that 4th one, but it's starting to get pretty hard. So come March, when we get to the Peaks Challenge, you're confident that you've built that endurance up so you can get through all those longer climbs. Now, I guess what we need to keep in mind now is that we're dealing with different levels of ability with everyone doing these programs. If you're someone who finds 2 repeats pretty challenging, then I'd suggest just to stick to the 2 reps and stick to the program. But if you're someone that finds a 4 to 5 hour ride and 3 or 4 repeats of a big long climb not too challenging, I'd probably suggest to add a little bit more onto the rides if you can. What we're trying to do is get to a point by the end of each ride now, these big long rides, where the body's getting tired and you're actually at a point where you've got to really work in that last hour or so just to get home again. Because that's what brings on adaptation. You need to get fitter, you need to push the body with each session. And hopefully you can do it strategically and just each week do a little bit more. So keep in mind now with all the sessions in the program that if you're finding it super easy, I'd probably suggest to try and do a little bit more. If you're finding the sessions really challenging, then just scale it back a little bit. But keep in mind that it is a big day come March and we need to do as much as we can. And I think what I've prescribed within the programs is just enough to hopefully get you through. In the subsequent weeks of training, you'll find that there's some big, what I've called epic rides in there. And they're the ones where you really need to focus in on your ability and say, hey, I reckon I could get through this big loop just today. Like get to the point of fatigue by the end of it. So when you have a rest, the body adapts and you can then do a little bit more the next week. You want to get to the point in a ride where if you are prone to cramping and things like that, that you're like, oh yeah, I was pretty close to that point where always at the end of a big long ride I was nearly cramping, because you need to push a little bit, need to push that out. So on the day of the event, hopefully you're within your limits and you can get through safely. On that point, I guess it's also smart now to remember that nutrition should be dialed in by now. You should be stuffing your pockets full of the foods that you know you enjoy and you know are working for you. We're having some pretty hot days out there in this Australian summer, and hydration is also pretty important. So you should know where all those little sneaky tap stops are, which cafes have got the water, the nice cold water bottle you can fill yours up with, so that 1, you can get through that training ride in one piece, but 2, if you put yourself in dire straits within a single training ride and you're really dehydrated, the following days really do suffer. And at this point in time, when consistency is the key, you really need to focus on ensuring your recovery strategies are good as well and appropriate so that you can back your next training sessions up. A lot of people have been asking me which group should I aim for on the day. If they've got a target time and they want to go sub 10 hours and they've done say 11 and a half the year before, there's a few things you've got to think about whether dropping down to that faster group is a smart idea or not. One can be, look at your stopping time from the previous years if you have done it. From that you can say, hey, look, I had 45 minutes stopping time. If I would try and reduce that and focus on not stopping for as long, you will therefore have that faster time without really getting any faster up the climbs. But I think the biggest thing to remember for Peaks Challenge is essentially your watts per kilo up each climb, and also the group that you're with on the flats. If you're with a faster group between those main climbs, it can save a lot of time. There are a few ways to try and figure out what your goal time should be and what group you should go with. I think one, if you're in Melbourne or any other state within Australia that's got some of the Bicycle Network rides, try and go to them so that you can jump into the group that you know the ride leaders are going to be riding your target pace. So if it's the 10-hour group, you try and stay with the 10-hour group on the training rides. Therefore, you're going to be confident on the day that you can stay with that group because you stayed with them in training. And if it was a bit tough in training, you might have to scale it back a bit. The other thing to do is on the day, say you want to go 10 hours, or you think you can go sub 10 hours, you might start with that group up to Wonga, and you're going to find out pretty quickly if that group's going too fast for you. And if it is going too fast, I'd say try and potentially hang on if it's near the top of the climb, or back it off and wait for that 11-hour group to come past. They probably won't be too far behind. You can gather your thoughts, have a drink, have something to eat, and then jump on that next group coming through. There's another couple of ways to do it where you can look at Strava, look at potentially your time or someone's time that you ride with that may have done it before, and see if you can keep up with them in training and see what times they've done up the climbs, and then see if that translates to the time that you want to try and do on the day. There's no spot on way of doing it, sadly. It really is a little bit of trial and error, and if you're doing it for the first time, it is going to be hard to know what time to aim for, especially if it's towards that slower end of the scale. Now, the other thing to keep in mind at the moment is, while we're talking about sort of the faster groups versus the slow groups, is that your training rides now need to start to reflect the time that you're going to try and target on the day. So if you are going to be a faster rider in that sort of 8 to 9 hour group, I'd say your longer rides need to be probably about 75 to 80% of that. So a 6-hour training ride, and a solid 6-hour ride, would probably suffice for someone who's going to go about 8 to 9 hours. If you're doing 10 hours, aim for about 75% of that and maybe do about a 7 to 8 hour bike ride. But if you think you're going to be going for up to 13 hours on the day, you probably need to try and spend, at least 10 to maybe 11 hours on your training rides, just plodding along at your pace, spending that time in the saddle. There's a lot of other factors that comes into play other than just what your legs can do. It can be how comfortable you are on the bike for that 13-hour period. So although my training programs have set durations for the rides, I would suggest to think about trying to potentially set a target of 75% total duration of what you're going to do on the day. So that might mean for some of you to ride a little bit longer than what's actually in the training program. A good way to look at it is it may be the TSS for the day. If you are using a power meter, you need to be doing probably more than a 400 TSS day during 3 peaks to get through. So your training rides need to reflect that. I would say somewhere between a 300 to a 400 TSS training day is probably a good way to look at it. So if you've got a power meter, that's one way to ensure that you're doing enough work within your long rides and doing enough intensity within them to equate to how hard it is going to be on the day. But another thing to keep in mind is if you can start to plan potentially getting out to some longer climbs than you'd normally ride. This might mean if you're in somewhere like Melbourne, we've got a few climbs that are longer than our standard Dandenongs and King Lake climbs. We've got Mount Donabuang, we've got Lake Mountain, we've even got Mount Buller. They're an hour plus climbs potentially, and if you can get out and make a day of it with a couple of mates and maybe do 1 or 2 repeats of those really long climbs, you're going to see how you're going to feel going up Hotham and the back of Falls on those longer climbs that are longer than what we normally do for, say, a 20-minute repeat. There is a big difference between 20 minutes and 60 plus minutes of continuous riding up a hill. I can assure you of that. And if you can do the efforts that replicate what you're going to be doing on the day up a long climb, then I'd 100% say that's a great alternative to some of the training sessions that I've actually got in Training Peaks or in the Bicycle Network PDFs that are up on the website. Okay, so if you've been watching these videos up on YouTube and you've had lots of questions to ask, then the opportunity to ask those questions has been in the Facebook Live videos I've been doing as well. There's one next Wednesday on the 9th of January at 7 p.m. If you want to jump in on that and ask as many questions as you want. The last one went for nearly an hour because I had lots of good questions. I think those ones are the good ones that I can actually answer the questions that everyone's got in their heads, as opposed to me at the moment just running through the program. I think there's a lot of good knowledge to be put out there. I just need to be prompted to figure out what that is. So if you've got an opportunity next Wednesday night on the 9th, I'd recommend jumping on Facebook and joining me for that. Otherwise, I hope your training's going really well. 2019 is already underway. We are in January. The big ride is in early March, so it's going to come around pretty quickly. So now's the time to be consistent, get those big training rides in, get that rest in when you need to, and hopefully leading through Jan into some really big rides in February, you'll be gathering lots of confidence and know that on the day, you can pretty much have a smile on your face and get through it in one piece. I'll see you next video.